She walked into the grand estate wearing a plain dress and worn-out shoes, her hair neatly tied back, eyes filled with quiet nervousness. Compared to the others gathered for the will reading, she looked completely out of place. The room was full of well-dressed relatives, whispering behind her back, casting judgmental glances, and barely hiding their smirks. To them, she was just a simple woman, a nobody. Not family, not important, just someone who, by some strange twist, had been invited. As the lawyer cleared his throat and opened the thick envelope, the room fell silent. Everyone expected their names to be read first. After all, they had known the wealthy Mr. Lancaster their whole lives. Some were his cousins, others business partners, and a few had always seen themselves as the natural heirs. But no one paid much attention to the quiet woman sitting at the end of the table, Ella. Ella had known Mr. Lancaster, but not in the way others did. She wasn't rich, she wasn't loud, and she certainly never acted entitled. What no one in the room knew was the truth about her connection to him. And when the lawyer finally began to speak, what he revealed left the entire room in shock. Whispers turned into gasps, faces turned pale. The woman they had mocked was the only one mentioned in the will. Why had Mr. Lancaster chosen her over his own blood? What secret bond did they share that no one ever suspected? And most of all, what would Ella do now, knowing she had inherited everything? This wasn't just about money. This was about legacy, love, and the truth that no one saw coming. But for Ella, the hardest part was still ahead, because not everyone was ready to let her walk away with the fortune. Ella sat frozen, her fingers tightening around the edge of her chair as the lawyer repeated her name. The murmurs around her grew louder. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband and whispered sharply, "This has to be a mistake." Another man, red-faced and shaking his head, stood up demanding answers. But the lawyer remained calm, flipping to the next page of the will, reading Mr. Lancaster's words word for word. It became clear that this wasn't some legal error. Mr. Lancaster had left everything, his estate, his businesses, even the old countryside mansion, to Ella. And yet, no one could understand why. She wasn't family, at least not by blood. She had no known ties to the Lancaster name. That made her inheritance all the more unbelievable. What the others didn't know was that Ella had once worked for Mr. Lancaster. Years ago, when no one was paying attention, she had taken care of him after a bad fall. She had stayed late when nurses quit, brought him meals, and listened to his stories when no one else had the time. But Ella never expected anything in return. In fact, she had left that job quietly, never once asking for favors or recognition. The people in the room only saw a quiet woman in plain clothes. They didn't know about the late-night conversations, the promises made in private, or the moments that had changed both their lives. Now, with every eye locked on her, suspicion thick in the air, Ella felt the weight of something much bigger than money. Jealousy was already brewing. Someone in that room wasn't going to let this go. And as the lawyer closed the folder and stood up, Ella realized her life would never be the same again. Outside the reading room, the storm was just beginning to brew. Whispers turned into phone calls. Old family friends, forgotten cousins, and distant relatives who hadn't seen Mr. Lancaster in years were suddenly showing up at the estate gates, demanding explanations. Inside, Ella felt the weight of their stares following her down every hallway. It wasn't just disbelief anymore, it was resentment. One woman, Claudine, Mr. Lancaster's niece and a prominent figure in the local business scene, had already called her lawyers. She wasn't going to let her family's inheritance go to a former caretaker, as she coldly described Ella. To her, Ella's kindness was manipulation. To others, it was a mystery still too strange to believe. Meanwhile, Daniel, Mr. Lancaster's former business partner, was quietly digging through old records, trying to find anything that could discredit the will. He believed Ella had to be hiding something, a hidden relationship, a forged signature, maybe even blackmail. But what he didn't expect was how clean everything seemed. Too clean, no loose ends, no legal cracks, just Mr. Lancaster's clear and final words. At night, Ella would sit alone in the mansion, once a place she had only passed through as an employee. Now, it echoed with memories she didn't quite understand. Why had Mr. Lancaster trusted her with all of this? Was it just gratitude, or something deeper she never saw coming? Even the staff who had worked at the estate for years was starting to change around her. Smiles turned into polite silence. Doors that were once open now remained shut. It was clear. This wasn't just about wealth. It was about power, legacy, and the idea that someone like Ella wasn't meant to have either. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was already plotting to take it all back. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm with no umbrella. Ella tried to keep to herself, quietly sorting through the documents Mr. Lancaster had left behind, trying to make sense of everything. But the silence around her was no longer peaceful, it was full of tension. People she didn't even know were suddenly showing up at the mansion, pretending to be old friends, dropping hints about what's fair, and reminding her of the family legacy she was now standing in the middle of. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Ella found an envelope tucked beneath a drawer in the old man's study. It wasn't labeled, just sealed carefully, like it was never meant to be found. Her hands shook as she held it, wondering if this held the answers, or more questions. Before she could open it, footsteps echoed down the hall. Someone else was in the house. She called out, but no one responded. A door creaked shut somewhere upstairs. At the same time, Clauding's legal team was pressing hard, questioning the will's validity and accusing Ella of taking advantage of a dying man. News outlets were beginning to sniff around, sensing a juicy headline about fortune, betrayal, and a woman with no last name that carried weight, until now. Daniel, still obsessed with uncovering a hidden motive, claimed to have found a letter Mr. Lancaster wrote just days before his death. But instead of clarity, the letter raised more doubts. It hinted at a painful memory, something buried deep in the past, something even Ella didn't know. The air in the mansion grew heavier. Eyes were watching her every move. Trust was vanishing. And as Ella stood at the edge of everything she never asked for, she realized someone wanted her out, and they were getting closer. Just when Ella thought the pressure couldn't tighten any further, the second shock hit her like a wave. Early one morning, as she sifted through Mr. Lancaster's personal journals in the library, she found a photograph folded inside a leather-bound book. It was old and faded, but unmistakable. Mr. Lancaster standing beside a young woman who looked almost exactly like Ella. Same eyes, same soft smile. On the back, in Mr. Lancaster's handwriting, it read, "Asterisk for my daughter, when the time is right." Asterisk. Her heart raced. Daughter? Ella had always believed she was adopted, raised by a kind but distant woman who never spoke of her real parents. The photo, the note, the way Mr. Lancaster had trusted her so completely, it all started to make terrifying sense. If it was true, it would explain everything. But it also meant that the stakes were now far higher than anyone imagined. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was blood. As the news slowly leaked, perhaps through someone on the inside, the family turned from bitterness to fury. Claudine was no longer just angry, she was threatened. If Ella truly was Mr. Lancaster's daughter, there was no undoing the will, no loophole to exploit. But not everyone believed it, and someone seemed determined to erase any evidence. That night, the sealed envelope Ella had hidden went missing. Doors were left unlocked. Papers were moved, and outside, just beyond the estate's iron gates, a dark car sat parked longer than necessary. Ella was no longer dealing with just legal threats or cold stares. This had turned into something deeper, darker. Someone wasn't just trying to take the fortune. They were trying to bury the truth. And now, Ella wasn't sure who she could trust, or how far someone might go to silence her. The truth came crashing down on a rainy evening, the kind that made the mansion feel colder than ever. Ella, holding nothing but the faded photograph and a growing sense of fear, decided it was time to confront it all. She called a private meeting with the lawyer, Claudine, and Daniel. Enough secrets. Enough hiding. She laid the photo on the table and quietly said, "I think I'm his daughter." The room went still. Claudine scoffed, accusing Ella of forging the photo. Daniel, however, went pale. Then, almost reluctantly, he pulled a second letter from his coat, one he had hidden for days. In it, Mr. Lancaster confirmed everything. He had fathered a child during a brief relationship kept secret from the world. He had spent years searching for her, and when he finally found Ella, he chose to stay silent, observing her from a distance, heartbroken by time lost but grateful for the second chance she unknowingly gave him. The will wasn't just a gift. It was a final act of love. Tears welled in Ella's eyes. The lawyer nodded, confirming the document's authenticity. Claudine, trembling with fury, stormed out without a word. The battle was over, or so it seemed. But just as Ella felt a moment of peace, the final twist unraveled. The envelope that had gone missing, it wasn't lost. It had been copied. And days later, news leaked online, a tabloid headline screaming about a secret Heir, old scandals, and $1 billion fortune left to a mystery woman. Strangers now knew her face. Reporters waited at the gates. Ella had won the truth, but lost her anonymity. The fortune wasn't just wealth, it was a spotlight. And in this new world of sudden fame and exposed secrets, Ella's quiet life was gone for good. In the weeks that followed, Ella's world changed completely. Paparazzi lined the roads outside the estate. Her face appeared in magazines, articles, and trending hashtags. For someone who had lived a quiet, simple life, the sudden fame felt overwhelming. But beneath the noise and headlines, something deeper had shifted. Ella now understood where she came from. And more importantly, she understood why Mr. Lancaster had chosen her. She spent her days carefully going through his journals, learning not only about her father's regrets, but also his hopes. He hadn't just left her a fortune, had left her a responsibility. Businesses, foundations, and staff that relied on his legacy were now in her hands. It was never about the money. It was about what she would do with it. Claudine never spoke to her again, but others slowly began to soften. Some relatives reached out with apologies. A few even admitted they had underestimated her. Daniel disappeared from the public eye, but Ella later learned he'd stepped down from his firm. Maybe the truth had shaken him too. Ella chose not to live in the mansion. Instead, she turned it into a foundation in Mr. Lancaster's name, helping young people from struggling backgrounds, people like she once was. The media eventually moved on, chasing the next scandal, and Ella found a quiet peace again, this time on her own terms. What started as a painful and public inheritance battle became something more, a journey of identity, justice, and quiet strength. The simple woman they mocked turned out to be the one person who never wanted the spotlight, but handled it with grace when it came. In the end, Ella didn't just inherit a fortune, she inherited the truth and found her place in a story much bigger than she ever imagined.